Imagine a world where for some very dumb reason France and Germany swapped places in 1933, with the entire population of France going to Germany and vice versa. This is how the ethnic map of Europe would change, and actually there would be a lot of changes in the upcoming Second World War. For example, Germany has no reason to attack Poland nor demand the Czechoslovak Sudetenland, as they are nowhere close to them. Further, if Germany successfully invades France, I think that the Germans would have a better position to win the Battle of Britain due to geographic proximity, but also be in a worse position for Operation Barbarossa if they initiated that is, as the Germans would need to pass through conquered France and Poland, then into conquered Soviet territories. Another interesting aspect is that Germany and Italy would immediately border each other in 1933, but also Spain would directly border Germany, so the Spanish joining the Axis is way more likely, and they would suffer less devastation during their civil war. There are still the German speakers in Austria, Czechoslovakia, Poland, Switzerland, and to a smaller extent Belgium, Italy and Denmark. And as we know, the German Führer wanted to unite the German speakers, so how does France and Germany swapping places change the Second World War? Let me show you how this crazy idea would actually play out. First up, the Germans don't take the French colonies, but rather only the mainland of France. In this alternate history, France doesn't have a coastline on the Mediterranean Sea, so them reaching Algeria and the rest of their colonies would be even more difficult. This would mean that said colonies are way more prone to rebel when the Second World War starts, and as I mentioned, the Axis and Spain clearly dominate the Mediterranean Sea, while France and Britain almost have no presence there. Still, assuming that this change magically happens in 1933, then France would operate the ex-German industry in the Rhineland, but without the economic restrictions. So I think that in 1933 France would deal better with the Great Depression. On a side note, Germany has reclaimed Alsace-Lorraine, but lost everything else. I want to take this very unrealistic concept and give you a plausible ending as to how the Second World War would play out. So, in late 1933, the German Führer still rises to power and, like in our own history, wants to unite all the German speakers, which would look like this considering the population exchanges. Now I do realize how horrible the map actually looks. I want to get this out of the way, but they have to reach Danzig somehow, or maybe take it as an exclave, so we would explore this later. For now, Germany in 1933 is much weaker than in our own history for two main reasons. The first one is that the French industry was smaller than the German one, so assuming that the terms of the Treaty of Versailles carry over, which I would allow, then Germany would be pressured even more to deliver their war operations with a slightly weaker industry. So I think it's fair to say that Germany would be hit the hardest by the Great Depression, making the ultranationalists even more popular and rise to power quicker. The second reason why Germany is weaker in this alternate timeline is that there are no countries to bully around us to get free land. Historically, Germany expanded rather easily into Austria, seizing their gold reserves and fueling their war economy, then doing the same to Czechoslovakia. This time Germany is in the place of France, and they cannot bully Belgium or Luxembourg without any consequences. They cannot declare war on France in 1936, they cannot successfully invade Switzerland, and they want to be allied with Spain and Italy, so Germany can realistically only expand uncontested into Andorra and Monaco, which to put it mildly doesn't change anything at all. I don't even have Monaco shown on this map, but I would have Germany to annex Andorra just for the sake of it. As such, the Anschluss of French Germany and Andorra would happen in 1936. This is your reminder not to take this video too seriously. In the following years, nothing interesting would immediately happen. In 1935, I assumed that Germany would get to re-annex the Saarland once again, like in our own history, where there was a referendum in the region, which voted overwhelmingly positively to join Germany, which would also happen in this alternate history. Now, I do think that Germany in this alternate history would be way more aggressive than you may think. The reason for that would absolutely surprise you, and this is the Maginot Line. Since France and Germany would swap places in 1933, the bulk of the Maginot Line was already constructed. Historically, construction began in late 1929 and finished in 1938, yet the majority of the defensive fortifications were done by mid-1930s, and only later the French expanded them with underground bunkers, artillery casemates and support infrastructure. In this alternate history, Germany would inherit the Maginot Line, being pretty much close to being completed. This means that if France were to invade Germany in the late 1930s, they would have a very big disadvantage, and let's be real, France is not initiating the Schlieffen Plan, so Germany due to the Maginot Line is really well defended, meaning that they can be way more aggressive and not have to face any consequences. So Germany would be way more aggressive and can get away with expanding, but as I said earlier, there is nowhere to expand apart from the microstates, which Germany would already annex. Well, in July of 1936, Spain would have their own civil war. Historically, Italy and Germany supported Franco and the Spanish ultranationalists, but this time I think it would be way different. In our own history, France initiated for a policy of non-intervention in the Spanish Civil War and put an arms embargo on the country, which almost all countries had signed. Germany, Italy and the Soviet Union signed this treaty, but as you know, they ignored the embargo. This time all of this would happen, but in an alternate way. In our own history, Germany sent quite a lot of equipment to nationalist Spain, and France had a cabinet meeting where they discussed an invasion of Germany as to stop this. Germany also, due to spies, knew that France could invade, so Germany limited the amount of support they gave to nationalist Spain. In this alternate history, Germany is protected by the Maginot Line and are right on the border of Spain, so they can send so much support and arms to Spain and not fear a French invasion. Of course, the French would still diplomatically protest this move, but the Austrian painter isn't the type of person to back down over some French diplomatic protests, so Germany would send an ungodly amount of equipment and support to Spain, hoping later to get them on their side. Now do remember that the Spanish Civil War was very helpful for Germany, where the Germans, although officially demilitarized, had tested their war equipment in Spain and improved said equipment over time. As Germany would send drastically more equipment, not only would nationalist Spain win very quickly and suffer less devastation, but also the German military would be in a better position. For the sake of this video, I would say that this alternate Spanish Civil War lasts only a year, so it would end in July 1937. In our own history, it lasted almost 3 whole years, so Spain was left very devastated, hence why they were uninterested in joining the Axis. In this alternate history, due to geographic proximity, I would say that Spain is quite likely to join the Axis, but I'm getting ahead of myself. As you can see, the Axis are in a quite strong position, but I think it would get even better for them. France and Britain would continue with their policy of appeasement, thinking that they can give Germany enough and this would stop them. This wouldn't change in this alternate history. Now, as you surely know, Germany wants to unite all the German speakers, and looking at this map, you can see that Switzerland stands in the way of Germany getting Austria, the Sudeten Germans, but also reaching the ones in Poland and Danzig. Of course, the dynamics would have shifted quite a lot, with Germany and France switching places, so Danzig is perhaps less supportive of Germany than in our own history, but I would ignore the thing called realism for obvious reasons. So Germany would desire to attack Switzerland as to get their German speakers and have a land bridge to reach the rest of the German speakers, with Italy also claiming the Italian-speaking canton of Ticino, so the Axis may for sure start looking into expansion in Switzerland. After all, let us not forget what the Austrian painter said about the Swiss, which is, Switzerland possesses the most disgusting and miserable people and political system. The Swiss are moral enemies of the new Germany. With the Axis having so much to gain out of invading Switzerland, I think that Germany would push for such an annexation. Like in the Munich conference, the Allies would like to prevent a war in the region, so they would negotiate to give Germany and Italy what they want, applying the appeasement strategy. In this alternate world, such conference would be held in Locarno, possibly the best city in the world. I was there and this is truly the most beautiful place on earth. So, in the Locarno conference, the Allies would agree to give to Germany Romandy, and this is the French-speaking cantons of Switzerland, while Italy would gain Ticino. Of course, Switzerland wouldn't be invited to these negotiations like in our own history. The Allies would warn Switzerland that if they were to refuse, the Allies wouldn't help them, and in fact view Switzerland as the aggressor for refusing. This is perfect for the Axis, as this means that they can expand freely into Switzerland, while the Swiss would be abandoned by France and Britain. Now I do believe that Switzerland, unlike Czechoslovakia, wouldn't accept to give any of their lands away for free, so I think that Switzerland is likely to be invaded by Italy and Germany in March 1938. Of course, the Germans and Italians weren't that strong at the time, but the Swiss only seriously started to prepare for war when the Second World War had started and France had already fallen, so the Axis would invade, but Switzerland would retreat to the mountains, abandoning most of their land and holding at the Alpine mountains. This plan is called the National Redoubt, as the Swiss wanted to make an invasion of them very costly, serving as a deterrent. This time Switzerland is clearly in the way of the Axis expansionism, so with some potential Spanish volunteers, the Axis could quickly conquer most of Switzerland, and France and Britain would allow it to happen, seeing how Switzerland didn't obey by the conditions of the Locarno conference. I think that we can all agree that the Swiss would eventually fall. The Alps cannot produce enough food for the soldiers, so the Axis would hold them at bay and starve the Swiss defenders. In the peace treaty, the Swiss would be dismantled, Italy would gain Ticino and minor parts of Switzerland, while Germany would directly annex the rest of the country. In 1939, Liechtenstein would try to go ultranationalist themselves, with the streets of Vaduz being decorated by ultranationalist German flags. In our own history, Germany didn't invade and annex Liechtenstein as the Germans didn't want to risk a war with Switzerland. This time Switzerland is gone, so Germany can leverage Liechtenstein going ultranationalist and Germany could expand once more into the country, annexing yet another microstate that I'm sure you didn't even notice existed on my maps. In mid-1939, it's about time for the actual Anschluss to happen. But I'm sure that you're thinking, would warmongering Germany have it so easy annexing Austria in mid-1939? Well, shut up, they would, alright? Yes, this scenario is becoming very quickly too wacky, so I'm beyond making stuff up for now. In this alternate history, it would happen for some weird reason, and like historically, the Austrians would support being annexed into Germany for similar reasons. Now the Axis would directly border Hungary, which they would align and support their irredentist claims, so the Hungarians joining the Axis would be inevitable, but not right away due to the Little Entente still not being destroyed. This would be the last expansion of the Axis before the start of the Second World War. Now I would be honest, I have no idea how this war would start, so I would have to make something up. Let us say that Germany wants to include Luxembourg due to them being sort of German, but France would put their foot down, not allowing Germany to expand an inch anymore. Great Britain would also back France. Still, Germany invades regardless and swiftly conquers the small nation, with the Allies declaring war on Germany. France would be on the defensive like in our own history, but notice something very interesting. Germany isn't fighting Poland, and Germany doesn't have to worry about a two-front war, unlike our own history. This means that 100% of the German army would be put on France. Of course, Germany has Austria and Switzerland, so the front line is rather long. But still, Germany doesn't have to worry about the south, where to the south they would have Spain, and to the southeast they would have Italy, with the rest being just ocean. Having this in mind, the Germans would invade neutral Belgium and push through the Ardennes forest, which the French would consider impossible terrain. So the German tanks would rather quickly and easily find themselves near the Rhineland, which they would eventually occupy. France would lose the majority of their population and industry, and let's be honest, this may be enough to make France surrender, which still has the disjointed government spirit. Germany would also focus on occupying and invading the Netherlands, so German tanks would be rolling into France and there is nothing that the French can do, so they would surrender rather soon, not wanting to risk any more unnecessary French casualties. There is also a possibility of Poland joining the Axis, as Germany could promise them some French lands, but also the ones of Czechoslovakia. While this is a possibility, I would ignore it for now and just focus on what happened in our own history. France would still fall and Germany would annex the coastline for protection, much like in our own history. For simplicity's sake, Germany would also annex the Netherlands and Belgium. Out of the remnants of France, near Bavaria and Saxony, something like Vichy France would be established, but Vichy is a city that is right now in Germany, thus I would have Germany establish Nuremberg France, a semi-autonomous puppet state. Why Nuremberg, you may ask? Well, it's just a random city, you know, nothing World War II related happened there, I'm sure. Jokes aside, I also considered calling it Weimar France, but I think that this is just too cursed. Anyways, now France is dealt with, and I'm sure that the Little Entente are starting to feel the pressure. With the fall of France, the Soviet Union would be very vocal about their demands of Bessarabia. The Soviets only did this historically as France, the main guarantor of Romania, had fallen due to the Germans, which would happen in this alternate history as well. As such, Romania would give up Bessarabia and all of Bukovina to the Soviet Union. Germany would notice how the Little Entente didn't act together and how they were pushed around into giving up free land. Germany would want to intimidate the Little Entente, so they would focus getting Britain out of the war, then consolidating Europe on their own. As such, Germany would initiate the Battle of Britain, and this time Germany has the advantage of proximity, so the Battle of Britain would look drastically different. Of course, realistically, Germany still couldn't sustain their losses, but now the British are even more devastated than in our own history. Perhaps their air force is temporarily more crippled, but eventually Germany would have to admit defeat and use their resources elsewhere. Of course, the North African campaign is still going on, but I don't think anything will change in that front as well. So now Germany can look towards the destruction of the Little Entente, while fighting a war against Britain. But the Axis for sure have to sign some sort of a Molotov-Ribbentrop pact, just to ensure that the Soviet Union doesn't take any more of Romania, as Germany wants to protect Romanian oil and get it themselves. In this alternate mode of Ribbentrop Pact, Germany would promise the Soviets all of Finland, all of the Baltics and actually more of Poland, including Warsaw, while also gaining Carpathian Ruthenia from Czechoslovakia. Stalin, for the sake of this alternate history, would accept this deal. Germany would declare war on the Little Entente, which would join the Allies, while Stalin would start a separate war in late 1939 against Poland, much like the Winter War of our own history, which remained as a separate conflict. Now focusing on the war against the Little Entente, Yugoslavia pretty much would immediately crumble, with Bulgaria and Hungary joining the Axis, but also Italy had annexed Albania, so Yugoslavia is pretty much surrounded and fighting all of their neighboring countries. Considering how unstable Yugoslavia was, their collapse is pretty much guaranteed. Germany would also promise Romania not to partition their lands and restore their territory as to before the Soviet ultimatum, so Romania would also switch sides. Czechoslovakia would be quickly left alone, and although they would have fortifications on their front lines, the Axis are in a far stronger position, so I don't think that Czechoslovakia would hold out, eventually also capitulating. Regarding how the lands are partitioned, Germany promised Romania not to partition their lands, so Hungary wouldn't gain parts of Transylvania. The partitions of Yugoslavia would go exactly as in our own history, but Hungary would gain more of West Banat as compensation for not getting Transylvania temporarily. Hungary is further compensated by getting all of Slovakia, but Carpathian Ruthenia is given to the Soviet Union, while the Soviets give the Germans their promised lands according to the mode of Ribbentrop Pact. The Soviet Union would also take the opportunity to expand into the Baltics, much like in our own history. This time the Soviet Union would still invade Finland, but much later, and the Red Army is already battle-hardened from fighting Poland, so for the sake of this alternate history, I would have Finland to be entirely conquered by the Soviet Union, which would establish a puppet government in the country. Germany has almost consolidated all of Europe, which would encourage Spain to join the Axis officially, so the Germans and Spanish would besiege Gibraltar, which I think they would eventually capture. Germany likely still needs to secure the Swedish steel supplies, so them initiating Operation Barbarossa is a real possibility. The thing is that the British are way more prepared due to Germany having to deal with the Little Entente, but also the British somehow also inherit the French fleet and prevent them from falling into German hands just in an alternate way. I do believe that Denmark would still fall quite easily, but Germany taking out Norway I think would be a disaster, so they wouldn't secure the Swedish steel trade. This is the first minor victory for the Allies. In the meantime of Germany invading Norway and Gibraltar, Italy would also invade Greece. Of course the Italians would still struggle, but due to the Metaxas line, Bulgaria would occupy most of Thrace and Macedonia, with Italy eventually needing German help as to capitulate Greece. The thing is that with the British being more ready, perhaps Greece gets to keep Athens and the Peloponnese Peninsula due to British reinforcements, but also Crete. This is the only allied stronghold in the continent. In 1941, the Japanese would still take French into China and then get embargoed by the United States of America, which would lead to Pearl Harbor and Japan eventually allying with the Axis, and Germany also declaring war on the United States of America, even before the Germans have initiated Operation Barbarossa. Still, in early 1942, the Axis would break the mode of Ribbentrop Pact and invade the Soviet Union, but this time Stalin is way more prepared than in our own history. Still, Germany takes Minsk, Riga, Kiev and other major cities of the Soviet Union, but I don't think that Germany would reach as far as Stalingrad. Remember that Finland was taken entirely by the Soviet Union, so there is no continuation war, freeing up a bit of Red Army soldiers to defend against Germany. As for the Germans, they are about 1,000 miles away from the Soviet Union, and their army needs to pass through occupied France and Poland, meaning that there would be huge bottlenecks. The German army would suffer constant sabotages and bombings from the occupied territories, and even when they reach the Soviet Union, they would be fighting in undersupplied territories. What I'm trying to say is that the German army would get overextended far sooner than in our own history. Still, looking at Romania, they would have restored their lands and even expanded into Odessa, so there is one promise that the Austrian painter would keep. Due to lend-lease to the Soviet Union, I think that Germany is beyond screwed with this invasion. Now, I do believe that Germany would invade regardless, or eventually the Soviet Union would declare war on Germany. The two countries would be at war somehow is pretty much guaranteed. Still, Germany wanted to unite all of the German speakers, and in this cursed world, they would actually have achieved this for sure. Yet their ambitions wouldn't stop there. They likely still want Lebensraum, which although they're far away from the Soviet Union, they could still push for, not only colonizing France and Poland, but also the Western Soviet Union. Of course, this isn't realistic in the slightest, and I think that in this alternate history Germany is way more likely to stop. But as I just mentioned, the Soviet Union invading them regardless is also possible. In 1943, the tides of the war would definitely shift against the Axis, with them losing the North African campaign, including Spain losing their colonies. Now the Allies would start looking to land in Europe, initiating Operation Overlord, also known as D-Day. Historically, these landings were made in France, which is now Germany in this alternate history. I do believe that the Allies would have an easy time landing in Europe, not only because Italy is still very competent as ever, but also because of Spain had joined the Axis, and they are even weaker than the Italians. For now, the Allies would keep expanding their stronghold in Greece, while landing in Spain and southern Italy. Germany would occupy the rest of Spain and turn it into a puppet government, with Germany occupying and annexing Catalonia and the Basques directly. Still, most of Spain would be eventually lost, with Portugal joining the Allies. This peninsular war would look very similar to the one of the Napoleonic Wars. Germany is officially on the run, and their time is limited. Then the Italian landings would also have expanded eventually, and Rome would be liberated, and Mussolini would also be deposed. Germany has to annex yet more Italian territory in South Tyrol in Istria, while establishing the Italian Social Republic and putting Mussolini back in charge. In the meantime, the Soviet Union would not only have recovered but started advancing into Eastern Europe, which would mean that Romania and Bulgaria would immediately switch sides, while Tito's partisans would start an uprising in Yugoslavia, so Germany is losing control over the situation. In our own history, Germany managed to keep Hungary in the war due to geographic proximity, but this doesn't exist to the same extent in this alternate history, so I would have Hungary to also switch sides and become pro-communist. The Soviet Union would continue advancing and eventually reach Berlin. But remember, this is actually France, not Germany. The Soviet Union is liberating France. The Allies are the ones to land in Germany, but much like in our own history, the ultranationalist Germans would be defending their homeland much better, making it difficult for the British and Americans to expand their landings in Normandy. The Soviet Union in the meantime would keep occupying more of France, and in these lands they would free political prisoners and pro-communist sympathizers. I don't want to bore you with the details, but this war is eventually over, but for the sake of it, the United States nukes Paris, which is the capital city of Germany. In the peace treaty, I would ignore Asia, as I think the peace treaty would look like much similar to our own history, with communist China coming out on top eventually. Now, as for the interesting stuff in Europe, the pre-war borders would have been restored, but let us look at what actually would change. Stalin still gets Bessarabia and all of Bukovina, making Romania, Bulgaria, Hungary, Czechoslovakia and Poland communist, while taking a lot of eastern Polish lands according to the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Poland would be expanded into France, much like in our own history, with the rest of France becoming a communist state due to the Soviet occupation and influence in the country. The Soviets would also desire spheres of influence in Germany and Italy, the main Axis members, so the Soviets would occupy East Germany and Northern Italy, with Austria also becoming a Soviet client state. Eventually, East and West Germany gets formed, with the same fate happening to the north and south of Italy. As you can clearly see, the Soviet sphere of influence is far greater, including much more land than in our own history. I can also see Greece being partitioned into communist north and democratic south, or perhaps Bulgaria annexes Thrace as to give the communists better access to the Mediterranean Sea. Germany is split up like in our own history, so them swapping with France wouldn't result in a victory, but I think it has created for a far more entertaining alternate history. Now I would recommend you check out this movie I made regarding the whole world becoming communist, so I hope to see you there. Thank you for watching and goodbye.